Most people do not feel overwhelmed because their lives are falling apart. They feel overwhelmed because their minds never get a moment of rest. A problem shows up and suddenly it becomes the center of everything. You replay it while brushing your teeth. You carry it into every conversation. You lie awake at night running the same thoughts in circles, hoping that if you think long enough, clarity will magically appear. But it does not, because thinking harder is not the same as thinking clearly. You do not lose energy because of the problem itself. You lose energy because your attention stays trapped on it. When your mind fixates on what is wrong, it slowly forgets how to move forward. Emotion takes the wheel. Perspective narrows. Even simple decisions start to feel heavy. If you have ever felt mentally exhausted without doing anything physically demanding, this session is for you. If you have ever noticed how one unresolved issue can drain your motivation for everything else, this session is for you. If you have ever told yourself, "I know what I should do," and still felt stuck, this session is for you. Not because you are broken, not because you lack discipline or intelligence, because most people were never taught how to manage their focus when life gets complicated. This is not a session about positive thinking. It is not about ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It is definitely not about forcing yourself to feel motivated. It is about training your mind to respond differently. Here is a truth most people never stop to question. The problem is rarely the real threat. The way your mind reacts to it is. A mind that stays locked on problems contracts. It tightens. It feels smaller, weaker, and more helpless with every repeated thought. A mind trained to look for solutions expands. It regains control. It shifts from emotional reaction to deliberate action, and that shift changes everything. When you focus only on what is wrong, your nervous system stays on edge. Your body prepares for danger instead of movement, and clarity disappears. When you focus on what can be done next, even if it is small, your system settles. Your breathing slows, your thinking sharpens, momentum quietly returns. This session is designed to guide you back to that state. Over the next 60 minutes, you will not be asked to solve your entire life. You will not be asked to make drastic changes or set unrealistic goals. You will be asked to do something far more powerful. You will learn how to interrupt mental loops that keep you stuck. You will learn how to separate facts from the stories your emotions attach to them. You will learn how to regain clarity when your thoughts feel crowded and loud. Most importantly, you will learn how to train your mind to move toward solutions instead of feeding problems. Clarity is not something you wait for, it is something you practice. When your mind becomes clear, action becomes simple, not easy but simple. By the end of this session, you will not feel like life suddenly has no challenges. You will feel steadier. You will feel more grounded. You will feel more capable of meeting problems without being consumed by them. This is where calm replaces chaos. This is where focus replaces overthinking. This is where you stop asking why things are happening and start deciding what to do next. Let us begin. Chapter 1: Problems are not the enemy. Most people treat problems as threats. They see them as something to fear, something to avoid, something that must disappear before they can feel calm again. That belief quietly creates more damage than the problem itself because it teaches your mind a dangerous rule. It teaches your mind that peace is only possible when nothing is wrong. It teaches your mind that calm is something you are allowed to feel only after life behaves. A problem is not an enemy. It does not arrive to punish you. It arrives to reveal something about your environment, your habits, your decisions, or your current way of thinking. In a strange way, problems are not proof that life is failing. Problems are proof that life is giving you feedback. They are the dashboard lights on the inside of your experience, not a personal insult, not a sign that you are broken, not a verdict on your value. The real danger begins when your mind mistakes the presence of a problem for a signal that something is wrong with you. When that happens, clarity collapses. Instead of seeing a situation for what it is, your mind reacts emotionally. Tension rises, thoughts speed up. The problem starts to feel bigger, heavier, and more personal than it actually is. A normal challenge becomes a crisis. A temporary obstacle becomes a permanent identity. A simple decision turns into a self-worth test. This is where most people get stuck. They do not struggle because the problem is unsolvable. They struggle because they fuse the problem with their identity. They think this should not be happening to me, or if I were smarter, stronger, or more disciplined, this would not exist. In that moment, the problem stops being information. It becomes a judgment. It becomes a story about who you are, what you deserve, and what your future will look like. It becomes a courtroom, and you become both the defendant and the prosecutor. But problems were never meant to be judgments. They are signals. They are signals that something needs attention. They are signals that something needs adjustment. They are signals that there is a gap between where you are and where you want to be. That is all. The meaning you attach to that signal is optional, but most people attach meaning automatically because they were trained to. When you remove emotion from the equation, problems become neutral. They do not carry meaning. They do not attack your worth. They simply point, yet most minds are not trained to see them this way. From a young age, many of us were conditioned to associate problems with failure. Mistakes meant punishment. Struggle meant weakness. Difficulty meant you were behind. Getting something wrong did not just mean you needed to learn. It often meant you needed to be ashamed. So when problems appear in adult life, financial pressure, relationship tension, uncertainty about direction, the nervous system reacts as if danger is present. The body tightens. The mind goes into defense mode. Instead of asking, "What is this showing me?" the mind asks, "How do I make this stop?" Instead of curiosity, you get panic. Instead of strategy, you get reaction. Instead of progress, you get noise. That shift changes everything. When your goal becomes escaping discomfort rather than understanding it, your thinking narrows, you rush, you overthink, you replay the same scenarios without resolution. You look for the fastest exit, not the best solution. You start doing things just to lower anxiety, even if those things create bigger problems later. You send the impulsive message. You avoid the hard conversation. You procrastinate and then punish yourself for procrastinating. You distract yourself and then feel guilty for needing distraction. You go in circles, and the circle becomes your routine. This is why problems feel exhausting, not because they require effort, but because emotional resistance consumes energy. A problem observed calmly takes far less power than a problem resisted emotionally. Resistance is not just a thought. Resistance is a full-body posture. Resistance is tightened breathing. Resistance is internal argument. Resistance is mental rehearsal. Resistance is the constant effort of trying to make reality different than it is before you even decide what to do about it. Think about this carefully. Two people can face the same situation. One feels overwhelmed, anxious, and stuck. The other feels focused, grounded, and decisive. The difference is not intelligence, it is not confidence, it is not luck, it is interpretation. One sees the problem as a threat to their stability. The other sees it as a situation that requires a response. One collapses inward, the other moves outward. One becomes consumed by the question, "What does this mean about me?" The other becomes guided by the question, "What does this require of me?" This session is built on a simple but often ignored principle. A problem does not control your state. Your relationship to the problem does. The problem is the event. The relationship is the lens. The event may be fixed, at least for the moment, but the lens is adjustable. That is why two people can live in the same reality, but experience completely different worlds inside their heads. When you treat problems as enemies, you fight them emotionally. When you treat problems as data, you work with them strategically, and strategy always outperforms emotion. Emotion reacts quickly, but emotion is not designed for precision. Strategy is slower, but strategy is designed for results. Emotion wants relief. Strategy wants resolution. Emotion wants to feel safe. Strategy wants to get clear. Here is where clarity begins. A problem is unprocessed information. It exists because something has not been addressed, adjusted, or decided yet. It might be a boundary that has not been set. It might be a conversation that has not been had. It might be a habit that has quietly taken control. It might be a decision you have been avoiding because you want certainty first. Whatever it is, the problem is pointing to something unfinished. Once you see it that way, the emotional charge weakens. Instead of saying, "This is ruining my life," you say, "This is pointing to something I need to handle." Instead of saying, "I cannot believe this is happening," you say, "This is happening and I need to respond well." Instead of saying, "This proves I am failing," you say, "This is feedback and I can learn from feedback." That single shift creates space. It creates space between the problem and your reaction. It creates space between emotion and action. It creates space where clarity can return. It creates room for you to choose your response instead of being dragged into it. Most people never create that space. They react immediately. They spiral. They assume urgency where none exists, but urgency is often an illusion created by emotion. Emotion takes a moment and labels it as an emergency because emergencies give the mind a reason to panic. Panic feels like action, even when it produces no progress. Clear thinking begins when you slow the moment down, not by ignoring the problem, but by refusing to let it hijack your nervous system. When a problem appears, your first task is not to solve it. Your first task is to stabilize your mind. An unstable mind cannot produce clean solutions. A reactive mind cannot see options. A tense mind turns every choice into a threat. You do not need answers right away. You need calm first. Calm allows you to see options. Calm allows you to prioritize. Calm allows you to decide what actually matters. Calm lets you separate the urgent from the important. Calm lets you see what you can control, what you cannot control, and what you have been confusing for far too long. Without calm, every problem feels equal. When everything feels equally urgent, nothing gets resolved. That is why emotional control is not a personality trait. It is a skill. It is trained attention. It is the ability to notice what your mind is doing and then redirect it with intention. A trained mind does not deny discomfort, it observes it. It notices the tightening in the chest, the racing thoughts, the urge to react. Instead of obeying those signals, it pauses. It takes a breath that actually reaches the lungs. It lowers the shoulders. It chooses to see the situation as information first and only then as emotion. That pause is power. In that pause, the problem shrinks back to its true size. It becomes manageable. It becomes specific. It becomes workable. It stops being a shadow monster in the corner and becomes an actual object you can pick up, look at, and decide how to handle. Most problems are not massive. They only feel massive when viewed through emotional distortion. Once emotion steps back, reality becomes clearer. You begin to ask better questions. What part of this is within my control? What decision have I been avoiding? What action, if taken, would reduce this tension even slightly? What is the simplest next step that moves this forward? Those are solution-oriented questions, and they cannot be accessed when the mind is busy defending itself. A defensive mind wants to be right. A solution mind wants to be effective. A defensive mind wants to escape discomfort. A solution mind wants to create progress. This chapter is not about minimizing your challenges. It is about reframing your relationship with them. You do not need a life without problems. You need a mind that does not collapse when problems appear. You need a mind that can stay steady while it works. You need a mind that can hold discomfort without turning it into chaos. When you stop treating problems as enemies, you stop wasting energy fighting reality. You redirect that energy toward movement. Movement, even small imperfect movement, restores confidence. It restores your sense of agency. It reminds you that you are not helpless because helplessness is rarely a fact. Helplessness is often a feeling produced by a mind that has lost its focus. Remember this, problems are not the enemy. An ineffective mind is. The moment you stop fighting the problem emotionally, you take the first step toward real clarity, and real clarity is what turns pressure into progress. Chapter 2, Why Your Mind Loves Problems. It may sound strange to hear this, but your mind is not trying to help you when it clings to problems. It is trying to protect you. That distinction matters because it changes how you relate to your own thinking. When you believe your mind is always helpful, you obey it. When you understand your mind is often protective, you can listen without surrendering control. The human mind did not evolve to create clarity, it evolved to detect danger. Long before comfort and stability existed, survival depended on one skill above all others, noticing what could go wrong. If you saw the threat first, you stayed alive. If you missed it, you paid for it. That wiring still exists in you today, even if your life is not spent dodging predators. Your brain still scans for risk. It still looks for what is missing, what could break, what might hurt. So when a problem appears, your mind does not ask whether obsessing over it is useful. It asks whether it feels familiar. Familiarity, even when uncomfortable, can feel safer than uncertainty. This is one of the weird truths of being human. The nervous system does not always choose what is best for you. It often chooses what it recognizes. This is why problems are sticky. Your mind returns to them again and again, not because repetition solves anything, but because repetition creates the illusion of control. If you keep thinking, you feel busy. If you feel busy, you feel involved. If you feel involved, you feel like you are doing something, even when nothing is actually changing. Your mind treats attention like effort and effort like progress, even when the effort is going nowhere. This is one of the most deceptive mental traps. Overthinking feels productive. Worry feels responsible. Replaying scenarios feels like preparation. You can sit in your head for hours and believe you are being serious, mature, and careful, yet none of those habits guarantee progress. In fact, they often prevent it because the energy you could use for movement gets burned up in mental rehearsal. Your mind prefers problems because problems are known territory. Solutions, on the other hand, require movement. They require decisions. They require the possibility of being wrong. Solutions create exposure. Solutions create accountability. Solutions force you to step into the unknown and deal with real consequences. Uncertainty makes the nervous system uncomfortable, so the mind chooses the safer option. It stays with the problem. It stays with analysis. It stays with commentary. It stays with maybe because maybe has no risk. This is why you can clearly see what is wrong in your life but still struggle to take action. Seeing problems does not demand courage. Acting on solutions does. It is easy to list what is broken. It is harder to make a phone call, set a boundary, admit a mistake, leave a comfort zone, or choose a direction when you are not guaranteed success. Another reason your mind loves problems is emotional payoff. Problems give emotions something to attach to. Frustration, anger, fear, disappointment, and resentment all need a target. A problem provides one. Without realizing it, people become emotionally invested in their problems. They talk about them, they revisit them, they collect evidence, they replay conversations, they build arguments. They keep the problem warm because the emotions feel intense, and intensity can be confused for importance. Over time, the problem becomes part of identity. This is subtle but powerful. You are no longer someone facing a challenge. You become someone dealing with a difficult situation. You become someone who is always under pressure. You become someone who is going through it. Once a problem becomes part of who you are, letting go of it can feel like losing a piece of yourself. So the mind resists resolution not consciously but quietly. It does not say, I want to stay stuck. It says, this is what I know. It says, at least this pain makes sense. It says, I know who I am in this story. That is why some problems linger far longer than necessary. The mind says, at least I know this pain, and unknown improvement feels riskier than familiar discomfort. You might even notice yourself getting close to a solution and then suddenly drifting back into the old cycle of worrying and repeating. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because the nervous system is attached to what it recognizes. There is also a biological reason this happens. When you focus on problems, your brain releases stress hormones. Those hormones can sharpen attention in the short term. They make everything feel urgent and important. They narrow your focus onto the threat. In an emergency, that is useful. In everyday life, it becomes a trap. That chemical intensity tricks the mind into believing something meaningful is happening because the body feels activated. But prolonged stress shuts down higher-level thinking. Creativity decreases, perspective narrows, options disappear, you stop seeing nuance, you stop seeing alternatives, you stop seeing the long game. So the very state you enter to solve the problem becomes the state that makes solutions harder to see. This is the paradox. The mind keeps returning to problems to feel prepared. The longer it stays there, the less capable it becomes. The loop feels protective, but it drains the very resources you need to move forward. Another pattern to notice is storytelling. The mind does not like incomplete narratives. When a problem appears, it immediately tries to explain it. Why did this happen? What does this mean? What will happen next? Those questions are not neutral. They come loaded with fear, past experience, and hidden assumptions. Instead of observing reality, the mind creates a story to make sense of uncertainty. Once the story exists, the mind defends it. If the story is negative, the problem feels permanent. If the story is dramatic, the problem feels overwhelming. If the story is personal, the problem feels like a verdict on your worth. Now the mind has even more reason to stay focused on the problem, because questioning the problem would mean questioning the story, and questioning the story would mean admitting it might not be true. Most people never pause long enough to notice this process happening. They assume their thoughts are facts. They assume their emotional reactions are accurate reflections of reality. They assume that because something feels urgent, it must be urgent. They assume that because something feels personal, it must be personal. But thoughts are habits, and habits can be trained. Once you understand that your mind is drawn to problems out of conditioning, not wisdom, you stop trusting every thought that demands your attention. You stop asking, why can I not stop thinking about this? And you start asking, what does my mind gain by staying here? You start noticing the payoffs. You start noticing how staying in the problem can protect you from the risk of action. You start noticing how worry can keep you from making a decision. You start noticing how analysis can keep you from feeling vulnerable. That question alone weakens the loop. The moment you see fixation as a pattern, not a necessity, choice returns. You are no longer fighting your mind. You are observing it. Observation creates distance. Distance creates control. Control creates options. This chapter is not about blaming the mind. The mind is doing what it was trained to do. It is trying to keep you safe with old tools. But you are no longer living in an environment where constant threat detection serves you. You are living in a world where clarity, judgment, and calm decision-making matter more. Which means the old programming must be updated. You do not need to eliminate problems from your life. You need to stop letting your mind treat them like home. You need to stop giving your attention away as if every issue deserves the same level of intensity. The next time you notice yourself circling the same issue, pause and remember this. Your mind is not asking for an answer. It is asking for certainty. Certainty does not come from more thinking. It comes from deliberate action, even small action, even imperfect action. Action creates new information. New information creates clarity. Clarity breaks the loop. In the next chapter, you will learn how to break this cycle by separating facts from the stories your mind attaches to them. Once the story dissolves, the problem loses its emotional grip. When that grip loosens, clarity has space to return, and you can finally move. Chapter 3: Separate Facts from Stories. Most mental suffering does not come from what happens. It comes from what your mind says about what happens. That might sound like a motivational quote, but it is actually a practical truth you can test in real life. You can be calm in a difficult situation if your mind stays accurate. You can be completely wrecked by a small situation if your mind turns it into a personal disaster. This distinction is subtle, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A fact is neutral. A story is emotional. A fact is something that can be recorded by a camera or written down without interpretation. A story is the meaning your mind attaches to that fact. A fact sounds like they did not reply to my message today. A story sounds like they are ignoring me because I do not matter. A fact sounds like the plan changed. A story sounds like nothing ever works out for me. A fact sounds like I made a mistake. A story sounds like this proves I am not competent. The fact is a single event. The story is a whole identity, a whole future, and a whole emotional storm built on top of that one event. The mind attaches meaning instantly. Something goes wrong. A message is not returned. A plan falls apart. A mistake is made. The fact is simple, but the story is loud. The story speaks faster than you can notice it forming. It arrives like a narrator in your head who sounds confident, urgent, and familiar. The story says this always happens to me. The story says I am falling behind. The story says this is proof that I am not enough. Suddenly a small event becomes a heavy burden. Suddenly your chest tightens. Suddenly you feel the need to fix everything immediately. Suddenly you are tired even though nothing truly heavy has happened yet. This is where clarity disappears. When facts and stories merge, your thinking loses precision. You stop responding to reality and start reacting to interpretation. You are no longer dealing with a missed message or a changed plan. You are dealing with a whole narrative about rejection, failure, danger, or humiliation. You are no longer solving a problem. You are protecting your identity from a story your mind created. Most people do not realize this is happening because stories feel true. They arrive wrapped in emotion, urgency, and familiarity, but truth and familiarity are not the same thing. A thought can feel true because you have repeated it many times. A thought can feel true because it matches an old wound. A thought can feel true because it explains uncertainty quickly. Feeling true does not mean it is accurate. The mind tells stories to protect itself from uncertainty. It would rather explain something quickly, even inaccurately, than sit with not knowing. So it fills in gaps, it assumes intent, it predicts outcomes, it exaggerates consequences. It turns a single moment into a pattern. It turns a pattern into a fate. Because these stories happen fast, they feel automatic. But automatic does not mean accurate. Here is the discipline that changes everything. You learn to pause long enough to separate the two. Fact first, story second. A fact answers the question, what happened? Nothing more. A story answers the question, what does this mean about me, my future, or my worth? The problem is that the mind treats the second answer as if it were part of the first. Once that happens, emotion takes over. You feel anxious not because of the fact, but because of the story. You feel discouraged not because of the situation, but because of the meaning you have attached to it. You feel angry not because of the event itself, but because of the assumptions you are making about why it happened. As long as the story remains unquestioned, the emotion feels justified. This is why people say, "I cannot stop feeling this way." They are not lying. They are describing what it is like to live inside a story that has been accepted as reality. As long as the story stays intact, the feeling will stay too. Clarity begins when you challenge the story, not the fact. You do not argue with reality, you investigate interpretation. This is not denial, it is accuracy. This is not pretending everything is fine. It is refusing to add extra pain on top of the pain that already exists. When you separate facts from stories, problems shrink to their true size. Not because they vanish, but because they stop carrying unnecessary weight. The weight is usually not the event. The weight is the meaning. The weight is the prediction. The weight is the conclusion your mind wrote too quickly. Here is a simple practice. When something triggers a strong emotional reaction, stop and write down exactly what happened. No adjectives, no explanations, no blame, just observable details. That is the fact. Write it as if you are a witness in court and you are only allowed to describe what you actually saw. Then write down everything your mind is saying about it. All the assumptions, all the predictions, all the conclusions, all the harsh statements, all the dramatic endings. That is the story. Do not censor it. Put it on paper so you can see it clearly, because thoughts are most powerful when they stay invisible. Most people are shocked when they do this for the first time. They realize how little of their stress comes from reality and how much comes from interpretation. They realize how quickly the mind turns one moment into a sentence about the entire future. They realize how often the mind speaks in absolutes. The story often includes words like always, never, everyone, no one, or nothing. These are signs of distortion. Reality is specific, stories are broad. Reality is grounded, stories are dramatic. Reality says this happened today. Stories say this will keep happening forever. Reality says this person did not reply. Stories say people do not respect me. Reality says I made an error. Stories say I always ruin things. Once you see the story clearly, you gain leverage. You can ask better questions. Is this story the only possible explanation? Is it the most likely explanation? Is it the most useful explanation? Is it based on evidence or fear? Would I speak to someone else this way? Would I make this conclusion about a friend I care about, or am I only making it about myself because I am emotionally involved? These questions do not eliminate problems. They eliminate exaggeration. Exaggeration is what drains energy. Exaggeration is what turns a manageable situation into a mental crisis. Exaggeration is what keeps you awake at night because the mind is not solving the fact. The mind is fighting the story. Another important point is that stories feel personal. Facts do not. The moment you hear yourself thinking, "This says something about who I am," you have moved out of fact and into narrative. The moment you hear, "This means I am failing," you are no longer dealing with the situation. You are dealing with identity. The moment you hear, "This proves I am not enough," your mind has turned a task into a verdict. That does not make you weak, it makes you human. It does mean clarity requires training. A trained mind does not suppress stories, it recognizes them. It says, "This is my mind trying to make sense of uncertainty, not this is absolute truth." That shift creates emotional distance. Distance creates calm. Calm creates options. Without distance, every problem feels like a verdict. With distance, problems become tasks. Tasks can be handled. Verdicts feel final. Tasks invite action. Verdicts invite collapse. Tasks invite strategy. Verdicts invite shame. This is the difference between emotional thinking and strategic thinking. Emotional thinking asks, "Why is this happening to me?" Strategic thinking asks, "What information is here?" Emotional thinking asks, "How do I make this feeling stop?" Strategic thinking asks, "What is the next move?" One drains power, the other restores it. You do not need to stop your mind from telling stories. You need to stop letting those stories run the show. You do not need to become emotionless. You need to become accurate. Accuracy is calm strength. Accuracy is the skill of staying anchored in what is real while refusing to be dragged around by what is assumed. When you separate facts from stories, you reclaim authority over your attention. You stop feeding unnecessary stress. You stop reacting to imagined futures. You stop arguing with interpretations that were never verified. You stop treating every thought like a command. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Precision is calm strength. Precision is what allows you to respond instead of react. Precision is what makes solutions visible again. As you continue, begin noticing how often your mind blends fact and story without permission. Do not judge it, just see it. Awareness alone weakens the pattern. The moment you notice that is a story, you create space. Space is where you regain control. In the next chapter, we build on this foundation by learning how emotional control creates mental clarity. Once stories loosen their grip, your emotional state becomes something you can influence, not something that controls you, and that is where real stability begins. Chapter 4, Emotional Control Creates Mental Clarity. Clarity does not disappear because you lack intelligence. It disappears because emotion takes the lid. You can be smart, experienced, and capable and still make terrible decisions when your emotions are driving. That does not mean you are unstable. It means you are human. It means your nervous system works exactly as it was designed to work. The moment emotion rises unchecked, thinking narrows. Your attention tightens, your options shrink. What once felt manageable suddenly feels overwhelming. A problem that could have been handled step by step starts to feel like a wall. Your mind goes from wide-angle vision to tunnel vision. You stop seeing choices and start seeing pressure. This is not a personal flaw. It is a biological response. When the nervous system senses threat, real or imagined, it prioritizes survival, not understanding. It chooses speed over accuracy, reaction over reflection. It prepares the body to protect itself, and it does that by narrowing your focus onto what feels dangerous right now. It does not stop to ask whether your interpretation is correct. It assumes urgency first and checks the facts later. That is why emotional moments feel urgent and why decisions made in those moments are often regretted later. In the heat of emotion, you do not feel like you are guessing. You feel like you are certain. You feel like you must act. You feel like your reaction is justified. Later, when the emotion has passed, you look back and realize you were not responding to reality. You were responding to a state. Most people believe they must solve the problem first in order to feel calm. The order is reversed. You must calm the mind first in order to see the solution. When you try to solve a problem while emotionally flooded, you usually do one of two things. You either rush into an action that gives quick relief, or you freeze and overthink because every option feels risky. Both responses come from the same place. They come from a nervous system that is not regulated. Emotional control is not suppression. It is not pretending you do not feel stressed, angry, or afraid. It is preventing those emotions from hijacking your thinking. It is the ability to feel what you feel without turning your feelings into commands. It is the ability to notice the inner fire without pouring gasoline on it. Uncontrolled emotion turns problems into emergencies. Controlled emotion turns problems into processes. An emergency demands immediate relief. A process invites calm steps. An emergency makes everything feel personal. A process makes things solvable. Think about the last time you felt emotionally overwhelmed. Your thoughts were likely repetitive, your body tense, your breathing shallow. You may have felt restless and stuck at the same time. In that state, creativity shuts down, perspective disappears. Even good advice sounds irritating or useless. That is not because the advice is wrong. It is because your mind is not in a state to receive it. When you are emotionally activated, you do not want information. You want relief. You do not want nuance. You want certainty. You do not want options. You want the discomfort to stop. This is why emotional control is foundational. Without it, no technique works, no strategy sticks, and no solution feels accessible. The mistake most people make is waiting for emotion to pass on its own. They distract themselves. They avoid the problem. They hope time will soften the feeling. Sometimes it does. Often it does not, because emotion does not simply go away when it is fed by attention and stories. Emotion feeds on attention. The more you engage with it mentally, the longer it stays active. The more you replay the situation, the longer it stays alive. The more you argue with it, the stronger it becomes. Even fighting emotion can be fuel because your mind stays focused on it. The nervous system stays activated because it keeps receiving the same message. This is urgent, this is dangerous, this matters right now. A control begins with interruption. Interruption does not mean you ignore the issue. It means you refuse to keep feeding the emotional loop. It means you step in as the leader of your attention. It means you break the automatic chain before it becomes a full spiral. The first skill is recognizing when emotion is rising, not after it has taken over, but at the moment it begins. That requires awareness of the body, tightness in the chest, a clenched jaw, shallow breathing, a racing pulse, heat in the face, a feeling of pressure behind the eyes, thoughts that speed up and repeat. These are not signs of weakness. They are early warning signals. They are your system telling you that you are leaving clarity. A trained mind notices them and pauses. It does not judge them. It does not panic about them. It simply recognizes my state is shifting, and if I do not lead it, it will lead me. That pause is not passive. It is deliberate. It is a decision to stop letting the situation pull you around from the inside. You stop trying to solve the problem for a moment. You stop replaying the story. You stop reacting. You shift your focus to regulation. You choose to stabilize before you strategize. You choose to regain access to your best thinking before you take action. You slow the breath. You relax the shoulders. You unclench the jaw. You ground attention in the present moment. You bring yourself back into the room, back into the chair, back into your actual environment, instead of letting your mind live inside imagined consequences. This may sound simple, but simplicity does not mean insignificance. Physiological calm restores cognitive access. When the body settles, the mind follows. When the body stays tense, the mind stays defensive. Your mind cannot feel safe in a body that is acting like it is in danger. This is why calm is strategic. A calm mind can see distinctions. It can prioritize. It can separate what matters from what does not. It can see the difference between a real threat and a loud thought. It can see timing. It can see trade-offs. It can choose the next step without adding drama. An emotional mind cannot. This is where many people resist. They think, if I calm down, I will stop caring, or if I do not stay emotionally engaged, nothing will get fixed. They believe intensity equals commitment. They believe anxiety equals responsibility. They believe anger equals strength. But emotion is not commitment. Intensity is not effectiveness. Excessive emotion often blocks resolution. Consider this carefully. No problem is solved at the emotional level it was created. Stress does not solve stress. Anger does not produce clarity. Fear does not generate insight. Those states can alert you, but they cannot guide you. They can signal, but they cannot steer. Emotions signal that something needs attention. Once the signal is received, it must be quieted. The signal is not the solution. The signal is the alert. This is the discipline. You feel the emotion, you acknowledge it, then you lower its volume. Not by force, but by choice. You are not telling yourself you should not feel what you feel. You are telling yourself, I will not let this feeling decide for me. You are not eliminating emotion. You are letting it. Leading emotion means deciding when it speaks and when it listens. When emotion leads, it demands immediate relief. When logic leads, it asks for the next effective step. Both exist. Only one should be in charge. Emotional control also changes how you perceive time. Under emotional pressure, everything feels urgent. You feel rushed to decide, pressured to respond, forced to act immediately. You feel like waiting is dangerous. You feel like a pause will make you lose something. You feel like if you do not do something right now, things will get worse. But urgency is often distortion. Most problems do not require instant action. They require correct action. Correct action requires space. Space is created through regulation. Space is created when you slow your body down and refuse to be pushed by inner noise. When you slow your response, you gain leverage. You stop reacting to imagined consequences. You stop defending against hypothetical futures. You start working with what is actually in front of you. You stop arguing with what might happen and start dealing with what is happening. This is mental clarity. It does not arrive suddenly. It returns gradually as emotional noise fades. It returns in small moments when you can finally hear yourself think. It returns when your breathing deepens. It returns when your mind stops shouting and starts sorting. Once it does, solutions appear more obvious than expected. Not because the problem changed, but because your state did. The same situation that felt impossible now looks like a set of steps. The same conversation that felt terrifying now looks like something you can handle calmly. The same decision that felt overwhelming now looks like a choice between 2 or 3 real options. This chapter is not asking you to become emotionally numb. It is asking you to become emotionally skilled. Skill means knowing when to engage and when to pause, when to feel and when to think, when to wait and when to act. Skill means recognizing that your state is part of the problem and part of the solution. Without this skill, every problem feels personal. With it, problems become technical. Technical problems can be solved. Personalized problems feel endless because they are attached to identity, shame, and fear. Remember this principle. You do not gain clarity by pushing harder. You gain clarity by settling first. Control your state and your thinking will follow. Regulate first, then respond. Stabilize first, then solve. In the next chapter, we build on this by learning how solution-focused thinking is a trainable skill, not a personality trait. Once emotion is under control, the mind becomes something you can direct, not something you must endure. Chapter 5, Solution Thinking is a Skill. Many people believe that some individuals are simply better at solving problems. They assume it is talent or intelligence or confidence. When they struggle to move forward, they quietly conclude that something is missing in them. They look at someone who stays calm under pressure and they tell themselves, that is just how that person is. They look at their own hesitation and they tell themselves, this is just how I am. This belief is comforting but false. It is comforting because it excuses you from learning. If it is talent, you either have it or you do not. If it is personality, you are stuck with it. If it is some rare kind of confidence, then of course you feel behind. But it is false because the ability you are calling talent is usually training. It is usually a set of mental habits practiced so often they look effortless. Solution thinking is not a trait you are born with. It is a skill you train. Like any skill, it follows a structure. Most people never learn that structure. They are taught to identify problems, analyze causes, and explain emotions, but not how to move from confusion to action. So when problems appear, they do what they know how to do. They think, they worry, they analyze, they wait. They mistake mental activity for progress. That is one of the most common traps in modern life. The mind stays busy so you feel like something is happening. Your thoughts stay loud so you feel like you are engaged. You keep rehearsing the same issue so you feel like you are being responsible. Yet your life does not move. The situation does not improve. The pressure stays. The mind stays tired. But solution thinking begins where overthinking ends. A solution-focused mind does not ask different questions because it is smarter. It asks different questions because it has been trained to. The shift is not mystical. It is directional. It is a choice of where to point attention when you are under pressure. The first difference is direction. Problem thinking looks backward. It asks what went wrong. It circles around blame, regret, and explanation. It asks, how did this happen? And then it keeps asking even after the answer is clear because the mind thinks explanation will create relief. Sometimes explanation helps. Most of the time, explanation becomes a loop that postpones action. Solution thinking looks forward. It asks, what can I do next? It does not deny the past. It refuses to live there. It uses the past for information and then stops. It recognizes something critical. You cannot change what already happened, but you can influence what happens next. The moment you accept that, mental friction decreases. You stop burning energy on what cannot be edited and you start directing energy toward what can. This forward orientation is not optimism. It is practicality. It is not pretending the past was fine. It is deciding the past will not be your prison. It is choosing movement over replay. The second difference is scale. Problem thinking magnifies. It treats everything as large, complex, and overwhelming. It makes the issue feel like a mountain and then stares at the whole mountain at once. When you do that, your nervous system reacts, as if you are expected to lift the entire thing in one attempt. The solution thinking reduces. It breaks situations down into the smallest actionable units, not because the problem is small, but because progress requires traction. Traction does not come from imagining the perfect end result. Traction comes from contact with the next step. Most people wait for a big solution. They want clarity before action, certainty before movement. They want to feel ready. They want guarantees. They want the plan to be complete. But clarity rarely arrives before action. It emerges because of it. Action creates new information. New information sharpens your thinking. Sharp thinking reveals better action. That is how progress actually works. That is why solution thinking begins with a small step, not the perfect step, not the final step, the next controllable one, the next step you can take without needing the whole picture. This requires discipline because the mind will resist small steps. The mind will call small steps pointless. The mind will say that is not enough. The mind will say if it is not the whole solution, why bother? That is problem thinking wearing a clever disguise. Small steps are not weak. Small steps are how every strong outcome begins. A disciplined mind asks 3 questions when facing any problem. What is within my control right now? What is the smallest action that reduces friction? What can I do today without waiting for motivation? These questions bypass emotional noise. They do not ask how you feel. They ask what is possible. They do not wait for confidence. They create conditions where confidence can grow. Possibility restores agency. Agency is the antidote to helplessness. When you take even a small action, your nervous system receives a signal. I am not trapped. That signal changes your state, energy returns, focus sharpens, thinking improves. You do not become calm because the problem is solved. You become calmer because you are moving. Movement tells the mind that you are capable. Movement tells the mind that danger is being handled. Movement turns panic into process. This is why action precedes clarity, not the other way around. Another core element of solution thinking is tolerance for imperfection. Problem-focused minds want certainty. They want guarantees. They want reassurance before moving. They want to know the result before they risk the step. They want to avoid looking foolish. They want to avoid being wrong. They want to avoid regret. They want safety. The solution-focused minds accept uncertainty as part of the process. They understand that action does not require confidence. It creates it. Confidence is not a prerequisite. It is a byproduct of follow-through. You gain trust in yourself by doing what you said you would do even when you feel unsure. Waiting until you feel ready is one of the most common ways people stay stuck. Readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. A trained mind does not ask, "Am I ready?" It asks, "Is this direction better than staying still?" If the answer is yes, it moves. This is not recklessness. It is momentum. Momentum teaches faster than contemplation ever will. Momentum turns fog into feedback. Momentum makes the next step visible. Momentum reduces fear because fear is often fueled by stillness. Stillness gives the mind too much room to imagine catastrophe. Another overlooked aspect of solution thinking is boundaries. Not every problem deserves unlimited attention. Problem-focused thinking obsesses. It treats every issue as urgent and important. Solution thinking prioritizes. It asks, "Is this worth my energy right now, and what happens if I do not solve this immediately?" Often the answer is surprising. Many problems lose intensity when attention is removed. They resolve themselves, or they shrink, or they reveal that they were never as critical as they felt. Some problems were never problems. They were noise. They were a misinterpretation. They were a demand from someone else that did not deserve full access to your mind. The solution-oriented mind is selective. It knows attention is finite. Where attention goes, energy follows. Where energy follows, results appear. If you treat attention like an unlimited resource, you will spend it on whatever screams loudest. If you treat attention like a limited budget, you will invest it where it matters. Solution thinking also includes knowing when not to act. Sometimes the most effective move is to wait, to gather information, to let emotions settle, to sleep on a decision, to allow the situation to reveal itself. But waiting in solution thinking is intentional. Waiting in problem thinking is avoidance. The difference is clarity of purpose. Intentional waiting has a reason and a time frame. Avoidance has excuses and a foggy future. Solution thinkers understand feedback. They do not see outcomes as verdicts. They see them as data. If something works, they note it. If it does not, they adjust. There is no drama in this process. Failure is not a personal flaw. It is information about what did not work. It is a signal to refine the approach. When failure stops meaning, "I am incapable," and starts meaning, "This approach needs adjustment," movement becomes easier. You stop performing for your ego and you start experimenting for results. You stop treating every attempt like a test of your worth and you start treating it like a step in a process. This is why solution thinking feels calmer. It is grounded in reality, not emotion. It does not require you to feel inspired. It requires you to be present. Presence changes how problems are experienced. Instead of feeling attacked by life, you feel engaged with it. You are no longer reacting. You are responding. That shift builds trust in yourself. Trust grows not from success but from follow-through. Each small action reinforces a new identity. I am someone who handles things. Not perfectly, not instantly, consistently. Consistency compounds over time. Problems stop feeling like threats. They start feeling like puzzles. Not because they are easy, but because you know how to approach them. You stop panicking at the existence of a problem and you start asking, what is the process here? You stop staring and you start stepping. You do not need a new personality. You need a new process. A process that moves you out of mental loops and into motion. A process that replaces overwhelm with direction. Remember this, you are not stuck because the problem is too big. You are stuck because your mind has been trained to stare instead of step. Train it to step. Clarity will follow. Chapter 6, Stop Asking the Wrong Questions. The quality of your thinking is shaped by the quality of your questions. Most people ask questions that quietly keep them stuck. They do not realize it because the questions feel natural. They feel reasonable. They even feel intelligent. They sound like self-awareness. They sound like depth. They sound like you are taking life seriously. But they lead nowhere. When something goes wrong, the mind instinctively asks, why is this happening to me? It asks, why do I always end up here? It asks, what is wrong with me? These questions feel deep, they feel reflective, they are traps, they pull you into the wrong kind of inner focus. They invite rumination instead of resolution. They push the mind toward explanation, not movement. Explanation alone does not change outcomes. You can understand your patterns perfectly and still repeat them. You can explain your childhood, your stress, your habits, and your triggers and still stay stuck in the same loop. Insight is valuable, but it is not enough. A mind can become addicted to insight the same way it becomes addicted to worry, because insight feels like progress without requiring risk. The mind loves these questions because they create a sense of engagement without commitment. You can ask why forever without having to act. You can analyze endlessly without choosing a direction. You can keep circling the same issue and still feel like you are doing something, even though you are not. That is why wrong questions are dangerous. They feel productive while quietly draining momentum. They keep you busy so you never have to be decisive. Solution-oriented thinking begins when you interrupt this pattern, not by forcing positivity, not by suppressing curiosity, by asking questions that create leverage. Leverage is the point. The right question is not the one that sounds wise. The right question is the one that changes what you do next. The first shift is moving from why to what. Why questions tend to look backward. What questions look forward. Why did this happen keeps you in the past. What needs to be done now brings you into the present. The present is the only place where action exists. A solution-focused mind understands that insight without action changes nothing. So it trains itself to ask questions that demand engagement with reality. It trains itself to ask questions that point to the next step, because the next step is what breaks the loop. Here are common wrong questions. Why can I not get my life together? Why does this always feel so hard? Why do other people have it easier? None of these contain a path forward. They invite comparison. They invite self-criticism. They invite helplessness. They are not questions that solve. They are questions that punish. Now contrast them with better questions. What part of this is within my control? What is the smallest step that would improve this situation? What decision have I been avoiding? These questions may not feel as emotionally dramatic, but they are effective. They do not comfort the ego, they activate responsibility. Responsibility is not blame. Responsibility is power. When you ask better questions, you change your relationship to the problem. You stop seeing yourself as someone things happen to. You start seeing yourself as someone who responds. That shift restores dignity. It also restores energy because helplessness is exhausting. Agency is energizing. Another category of wrong questions revolves around certainty. People ask, what if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? These questions feel cautious, but they paralyze. They assume perfect foresight is required before movement. Life does not work that way. No meaningful progress happens without uncertainty. The most important decisions are rarely made with complete information. They are made with imperfect information and steady intention. Better questions accept uncertainty as a condition, not a barrier. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" ask, "What would I learn if this did not work?" Instead of asking, "What is the right choice?" ask, "Which choice moves me forward even slightly?" Instead of asking, "What if I regret this?" ask, "What will I regret more, staying stuck or trying?" Forward movement corrects itself, stillness does not. A trained mind understands this. It does not seek guarantees, it seeks direction. It does not demand certainty, it demands traction. It does not ask for the perfect decision, it asks for the next effective one. Another subtle mistake is asking emotionally loaded questions like, "Why am I like this?" or "Why can I not be better?" These questions assume a flaw before any evidence is examined. They frame the problem as a defect of identity rather than a challenge of skill or circumstance. Over time, this damages confidence. It turns every struggle into a character flaw. It teaches you to see yourself as the problem, which makes it harder to act because action requires trust in your ability to improve. A solution-focused mind avoids identity-based questions. It does not ask, "What does this say about me?" It asks, "What does this require of me?" One weakens, the other strengthens. One keeps you small, the other moves you into responsibility without shame. When you stop interrogating your worth, energy becomes available for action. You stop wasting mental fuel on self-attacks, and you start using that fuel to solve what is actually in front of you. Another distinction is between questions that expand options and questions that narrow them. Problem-focused questions are narrow, they close doors. How is everything falling apart? How did I mess this up? These questions create a mental corner. They collapse your view until you can only see failure and pressure. Solution-focused questions expand. What options have I not considered yet? What would this look like if it were slightly better? Who could help me see this clearly? What is one approach I have not tried? Expansion creates breathing room. Breathing room is essential for clarity. You cannot think well when your mind feels trapped. Under pressure, the mind tends to ask extreme questions. It jumps to worst-case scenarios. It treats temporary difficulty as permanent failure. It treats one setback as evidence that everything is collapsing. That is why questions matter so much. They either calm the nervous system or inflame it. A question like, "What is one thing I can do in the next 24 hours?" grounds you in time and action. It lowers the emotional temperature. It brings the problem back to human scale. A question like, "What is the most important part of this?" prevents everything from feeling equally urgent. A question like, "What is the next conversation I need to have?" turns anxiety into a clear task. This is not about tricking yourself. It is about precision. A precision in language leads to precision in thought. Precision in thought leads to effective action. If your questions are vague and dramatic, your mind becomes vague and dramatic. If your questions are specific and grounded, your mind becomes specific and grounded. One of the most important questions you can train yourself to ask is this: what am I avoiding right now? Avoidance often hides behind complexity. It hides behind planning. It hides behind research. It hides behind endless consideration. It hides behind perfectionism. It hides behind "I need to think about it more." Avoidance keeps problems alive. The moment you name what you are avoiding, the problem loses some of its power, because avoidance feeds uncertainty and uncertainty fuels fear. The unknown always looks bigger than it is. Action shrinks the unknown. Even uncomfortable action restores clarity because it replaces imagined consequences with real information. This chapter is not about memorizing the right questions. It is about noticing the effect your questions have on your state. Do they lead you toward motion or stagnation? Do they lead you toward clarity or confusion? Do they lead you toward responsibility or resentment? You do not need perfect questions, you need useful ones. Useful questions point to action. They reduce emotional charge. They respect reality. They put you back in the role of someone who responds instead of someone who spirals. As you move through this session, listen to the questions your mind asks automatically. Do not judge them. Notice them. Then practice replacing them with questions that serve you, questions that move you forward. When you change your questions, you change your thinking. When your thinking changes, your relationship with problems changes too. Your life begins to feel less like a series of attacks and more like a series of decisions. In the next chapter, you will learn how to train your focus like a muscle so your attention stops drifting back to the same problems and starts supporting real progress. That training begins with awareness, and awareness begins with listening to the questions you repeat. Chapter 7, Train Your Focus Like a Muscle. Focus is not something you either have or do not have. It is something you train or neglect. That is the starting point because most people treat focus like a personality trait. They assume they are either good at it or bad at it. They assume they are naturally disciplined or naturally distracted. They assume their mind is just built this way. But focus is closer to strength than talent. It grows with practice. It weakens with neglect. It responds to repetition. It responds to environment. It responds to what you feed it every day. Many people believe their attention is naturally weak. They blame distraction, technology, stress, or lack of discipline. They tell themselves the modern world has ruined their focus, and in some ways it has made it harder, but the deeper issue is simpler. Their focus has never been trained with intention. Their attention has been used, not directed. It has been pulled around, not strengthened. Attention follows habit. Where you repeatedly place your attention, your mind learns to return. Your mind becomes familiar with certain mental locations the same way your body becomes familiar with certain routes. If you walk the same path every day, you stop thinking about it. Your feet just go there. The mind does the same thing. If you repeatedly walk the path of worry, your attention will go there automatically. This is why problems feel magnetic. Once your attention locks onto an issue, your mind keeps drifting back to it even when nothing new is happening. Not because the problem demands it, but because your focus has been conditioned to feed it. You are not being punished by the problem. You are being trained by repetition. A trained mind understands this pattern and works with it instead of fighting it. It does not get offended by distraction. It does not panic when the mind wanders. It simply recognizes this is a habit, and then it practices a different one. The first step is recognizing that focus is finite. You do not have unlimited mental energy. Every moment you spend revisiting the same problem drains attention from everything else. Every time you return to the same worry, you pull energy away from work, relationships, rest, creativity, and decision-making. You may still be doing things, but you are doing them with less presence. You are doing them with less power. This is why constant rumination feels exhausting. It is not the problem itself that tires you. It is the repeated redirection of attention to the same mental location. It is like carrying the same box from room to room all day. The box gets heavier not because it changed, but because you never put it down. Focus training begins with awareness. Notice where your attention goes when you are not directing it. Notice which thoughts pull you in without permission. Notice how often your mind revisits the same concerns. Notice the moments when your body is here, but your mind is somewhere else. Notice how quickly the mind turns quiet time into problem time. This observation is not meant to judge. It is meant to reveal patterns. Once you see the pattern, you can change it. Before you see it, you believe it is you. After you see it, you realize it is a loop. One of the most effective tools for training focus is containment. Containment means deciding when and where a problem is allowed to exist in your mind. Most people allow problems to roam freely. They show up during work, during conversations, during meals, during rest, and even during sleep. The mind treats the problem like it has permission to interrupt at any moment, and because it can interrupt, it does. A solution-oriented mind creates boundaries. It says, I will think about this problem at this time in this way. Outside that container, attention is redirected. This is not avoidance. It is discipline. Avoidance says, I will never look at it. Discipline says, I will look at it on purpose. Without containment, problems expand to fill all mental space. With containment, they shrink, they become specific, they become scheduled, they become manageable. They stop haunting you because your mind knows there is a place for them. A simple practice is time boxing. Choose a specific period to think about a problem. Write, plan, decide. Do not just think in circles. Put it on paper. Put it into steps. Put it into a next action. When the time ends, attention moves on. You do not keep paying attention to it all day as if attention itself is part of the solution. When the problem returns outside that window, you remind yourself, this has already been scheduled. You say it calmly, you say it firmly, you say it like you are closing a drawer. This trains the mind to respect structure. It also trains the mind to trust you because your mind does not relax when it believes nothing will be handled. It relaxes when it knows something has been acknowledged and placed somewhere real. Another powerful principle is starving what you do not want to grow. Attention is nourishment. What you feed grows stronger. What you neglect weakens. If you continuously feed anxious thoughts with attention, they become dominant. They become louder. They become quicker. They become the default. If you stop feeding them, they lose intensity over time. This does not happen instantly, but it is reliable. The mind is not loyal to anxiety. The mind is loyal to repetition. Many people make the mistake of arguing with distracting thoughts. They try to reason them away. They try to defeat them. They try to prove them wrong. They try to suppress them. That only gives them more attention. It turns the thought into a debate, and debates keep the thought alive. A trained mind does something simpler. It notices the thought and redirects attention without commentary, not forcefully, calmly. In the same way you guide your focus back when reading and realizing your mind wandered, you guide it back here. You do not punish yourself, you do not dramatize it, you just return. A focus is strengthened through redirection, not confrontation. Every return is a repetition. Every repetition is a workout. It does not matter that your mind wandered. It matters that you brought it back. That is the muscle being trained. That is control being built. Another key element is practicing deliberate attention on neutral tasks. People assume focus is trained only during intense work, but it is trained everywhere. The training ground is daily life. When you eat, eat. When you walk, walk. When you listen, listen. When you wash dishes, wash dishes. When you type, type. When you speak to someone, be there. Every time you bring your attention back to the present task, you reinforce control. You prove to yourself that your mind can be guided. You prove that attention is not an accident. You prove that you are not helpless inside your own head. This builds mental stability. A stable mind is less reactive. It does not jump from thought to thought seeking stimulation. It stays where you place it. It is calm not because life is easy, but because attention is not constantly being stolen. Stability reduces the grip of problems because problems thrive on uncontrolled attention. Problems grow when you keep revisiting them without purpose. Another important distinction is between focus and fixation. Focus is intentional. Fixation is automatic. Focus serves a purpose. Fixation drains energy. Focus creates progress. Fixation creates exhaustion. Learning to tell the difference matters because many people call fixation focus just because it is intense. Ask yourself, is this thought helping me move forward right now? If the answer is no, it does not deserve your full attention. This is not avoidance. It is prioritization. It is choosing to invest your attention where it produces results, not where it produces emotion. The solution-oriented focus asks, what deserves my attention at this moment? The answer changes throughout the day. Sometimes the answer is work. Sometimes the answer is rest. Sometimes the answer is a conversation. Sometimes the answer is a decision. But the mind must be taught to move where you place it instead of moving wherever worry pulls it. Another challenge many people face is mental residue. This happens when attention stays partially attached to a problem even after you move on. You are working but not fully present. You are resting but still thinking. You are talking to someone but half your mind is elsewhere. Split attention reduces effectiveness everywhere. It makes work slower. It makes rest less restful. It makes conversations feel shallow. It makes your entire life feel like it is happening through a fog. Clearing mental residue requires closure. Even small closure helps. Write the next step, make a simple decision, set a reminder, put it somewhere your mind trusts. The mind relaxes when it knows something has been acknowledged and scheduled. Unfinished thinking is what keeps attention stuck. The mind keeps pulling you back because it believes it must not forget. It believes forgetting equals danger. Focus training requires patience. Your mind will drift, it always does. The goal is not to eliminate distraction. The goal is to notice it sooner and return faster. Each return is a repetition. Repetition builds strength. Over time, the space between distractions grows. The pull of problems weakens. Your ability to choose where attention goes improves. This is not dramatic. It is gradual. It is powerful. It changes the texture of your days. It changes your ability to work. It changes your ability to rest. It changes your relationships. It changes your sense of stability. When you control your focus, you control what grows in your mind. You stop feeding anxiety with attention. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You stop reliving the same thoughts. You stop giving the same problem unlimited access to your inner life. In that space, clarity emerges not as a sudden insight but as a steady state. You begin to feel less crowded. You begin to feel more present. You begin to feel like you can breathe mentally. This chapter is about reclaiming your attention, not to become rigid but to become deliberate, not to become perfect but to become more intentional than your habits. Where your focus goes, your life follows. In the next chapter, we bring everything together by exploring the identity of a solution-oriented mind, an identity that no longer collapses under pressure, but responds with calm, direction, and purpose. Chapter 8, The Identity of a Solution-Oriented Mind. At a certain point, understanding is no longer the issue. You may already know how to calm yourself. You may already recognize destructive thought patterns. You may already understand what needs to change. You may even have moments where everything feels clear, where you can see the pattern from a distance, where you can name what is happening inside you with accuracy. Yet under pressure, you still find yourself reacting the same way. This is because behavior does not ultimately come from knowledge. It comes from identity. Knowledge can guide you when life is calm. Identity drives you when life is loud. When stress appears, you do not consult techniques. You default to who you believe you are. You default to your deepest assumption about yourself because assumptions act faster than strategy. That is why lasting change happens only when identity changes. A solution-oriented mind is not defined by constant confidence or positive emotion. It is defined by an internal stance toward life. It is defined by the way you relate to challenge. It is defined by what you do when you do not feel ready. It is defined by the posture you take toward discomfort. That stance sounds simple, but it is powerful. I am someone who handles things, not perfectly, not effortlessly, consistently. This identity does not say, I should be able to deal with this. It says, I will deal with this. The difference is subtle yet profound. Should creates pressure. Will creates direction. Should implies a moral failing if you struggle. Will implies a commitment to respond even when it is messy. Most people unconsciously carry an identity shaped by past overwhelm. They see themselves as someone who gets stuck, freezes, avoids, or overthinks. They have evidence for it because they have lived it. They remember the moments when pressure knocked them off course. They remember the times they delayed, ran, shut down, or spiraled. Those memories quietly become a self-definition. Once that identity is accepted, behavior follows automatically. When a problem appears, the reaction becomes predictable. Tension rises, self-doubt appears. Action is delayed, not because the problem is too big, but because the identity underneath it expects collapse. The mind is not just reacting to the situation. It is reacting to what it believes always happens. A solution-oriented identity changes that expectation. It does not assume ease. It assumes engagement. It does not demand that problems disappear in order for you to function. It assumes that life will require response, and it defines you as someone who responds. This identity accepts discomfort as part of progress. It does not interpret difficulty as a sign to stop. It says, this feels uncomfortable because I am stretching, not because I am failing. That interpretation preserves momentum. It keeps your nervous system from labeling every challenge as a threat. It reminds you that discomfort is often a sign of growth, not danger. Another defining feature of this identity is responsibility without self-attack. A problem-oriented identity often swings between blame and helplessness. Either everything is your fault or nothing is in your control. Both extremes drain power. If everything is your fault, you drown in shame. If nothing is in your control, you drown in helplessness. Both positions remove the one thing you need most, which is clean responsibility. A solution-oriented identity stands in the middle. It says, I did not choose everything that happened, but I choose how I respond. It says, I cannot control the whole situation, but I can control my next step. It says, I do not need to punish myself in order to improve. This keeps responsibility grounded. You are not carrying the weight of the world. You are carrying only what is yours to carry. That clarity reduces overwhelm. Overwhelm comes from vague responsibility. Clarity comes from defined responsibility. When you define what is yours, you stop trying to fix everything. When you stop trying to fix everything, you can finally fix something. This identity also reshapes emotional experience. Fear still appears, frustration still arises, doubt still shows up. You do not become emotionless, you become emotionally led in a different way. These emotions are no longer treated as commands, they are treated as signals. A solution-oriented mind listens without obeying. It hears the signal, acknowledges the feeling, and then returns to the anchor. Identity becomes the anchor. This prevents emotional spirals. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling, you ask, what action aligns with who I am? Instead of asking, how do I make the discomfort stop, you ask, what does someone like me do next? That question bypasses rumination. It moves you out of analysis and into behavior. It turns emotion into information, not a steering wheel. Another key aspect of this identity is patience. Not passive patience, active patience. The patience to take one step without demanding immediate relief. The patience to do what is right without needing to feel good first. The patience to allow clarity to emerge through action, not before it. Problem-oriented identities demand certainty first. They want guarantees. They want to know the outcome before they risk the move. Solution-oriented identities accept uncertainty as the cost of movement. They do not wait for confidence. They build it through follow-through. This identity also changes how mistakes are processed. Mistakes are no longer proof of inadequacy. They are information about what needs adjustment, information about what does not work, nothing more. This prevents shame from taking root. Shame turns attention inward and freezes progress. Information turns attention outward and restores movement. Shame says hide. Information says adjust. Shame says you are the problem. Information says your approach needs refining. A solution-oriented identity protects forward motion at all costs. It understands that stopping completely is more damaging than choosing imperfect action. It understands that consistency beats intensity. It understands that even a small step keeps you in the arena. This identity is deeply practical. It does not romanticize struggle. It does not dramatize difficulty. It does not turn every challenge into a story about destiny. It asks simple, grounded questions. What matters right now? What can I control? What is the next reasonable step? These questions become automatic because they match identity. You do not force them. They arise naturally. Identity simplifies thinking. When you know who you are, decisions become easier. You do not spend as much time negotiating with your emotions. You do not spend as much time proving yourself. You do not spend as much time asking permission to move. Another shift happens in how time is experienced. A problem-oriented identity feels crushed by the future. It tries to solve everything at once. It wants to fix the entire life in one day because being behind feels unbearable. A solution-oriented identity lives in sequence. One step, then the next. One conversation, then the next. One decision, then the next. This prevents paralysis. You stop asking, how do I fix my entire life? And you start asking, what is the next correct move? This shift restores calm. Calm is not the absence of problems. It is the absence of internal resistance. A solution-oriented identity reduces resistance. You stop fighting reality emotionally. You start working with it strategically. You stop needing the world to be perfect before you can function. You stop treating discomfort like an emergency. This identity is built slowly, not through declarations, not through motivation, through repetition. Each time you respond instead of react, identity strengthens. Each time you take responsibility without self-criticism, it deepens. Each time you act while uncertain, it solidifies. Each time you calm your body before you speak, it becomes more real. Each time you choose the next step instead of the next complaint, it becomes more natural. These moments seem small, but they accumulate evidence. Evidence changes self-image over time. Your brain believes what you repeatedly demonstrate. If you repeatedly demonstrate avoidance, your identity becomes avoidant. If you repeatedly demonstrate follow-through, your identity becomes stable. You stop wondering whether you can handle challenges. You assume that you will. That assumption changes everything. You approach problems differently. You speak to yourself differently. You recover faster. You stop making every setback mean something about your worth. You stop treating every discomfort like proof that you are failing. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means you become stable. Stability is the real goal, not control over circumstances, control over response. A solution-oriented identity is not rigid. It is adaptable. It adjusts when needed. It learns quickly. It moves forward without drama. It does not need to win every moment. It needs to keep moving. Drama feeds problems. Calm dissolves them. As you reach the end of this chapter, consider this carefully. When a problem appears, who do you become? Do you become tense and avoidant or grounded and engaged? Do you become reactive and loud inside your mind or steady and practical? Do you become someone who needs immediate relief or someone who can tolerate discomfort long enough to choose a good step? That answer has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with identity. Identity is not fixed, it is practiced. From this point on, you are not trying to eliminate problems. You are becoming someone who handles them with clarity. That is the true shift. Once that identity takes root, problems lose their emotional power. They no longer define you. They no longer intimidate you. They arrive and you respond calmly, deliberately, one step at a time. Epilogue: return to clarity, return to action. Clarity is not something you discover once and keep forever. It is something you return to again and again through practice. If you expect clarity to be a permanent state, you will constantly feel like you are failing. Life changes, stress appears, uncertainty returns. The mind gets noisy again. That does not mean you lost progress. It means you are human and humans need resets. Throughout this session, you have seen that problems themselves are not what drain you. What drains you is the way attention, emotion, and identity interact when a problem appears. When attention locks onto what is wrong, emotion rises. When emotion rises unchecked, thinking narrows. When thinking narrows, identity collapses into old patterns. That cycle is what keeps people stuck. It is not one big mistake. It is a loop that quietly runs in the background until you notice it. But you have also seen that the cycle can be interrupted. You learn that problems are not enemies but signals. You learn that the mind clings to problems not out of wisdom but conditioning. You learn that much of your suffering comes from stories layered on top of facts. You learn that emotional control is not suppression but leadership. You learn that solution thinking is a trainable skill. You learn that the questions you ask shape the direction of your life. You learn that focus is a muscle strengthened through deliberate use. Finally, you learned that lasting change comes from identity, not effort alone. These are not abstract ideas. They are tools, but tools only work when they are used. Understanding is only the beginning. The real shift happens when you practice under pressure, because pressure is where your old patterns will try to return. Practice is not something you do once. Practice is what you return to when you notice yourself drifting. The goal was never to eliminate problems from your life. That goal creates fragility. A life without problems is an illusion, and chasing it makes you anxious the moment discomfort appears. The real goal is to become stable in the presence of problems. Stability is what frees you. Stability is what makes progress possible even when life is messy. A stable mind does not panic, it does not dramatize, it does not collapse inward, it pauses, it observes, it responds. It accepts that something needs to be handled and it refuses to treat that as a threat to identity. This response does not require perfection, it requires engagement. One clear decision, one small action, one step forward. Over time, those steps compound. You may not notice it on day 1, you may not notice it on day 5, but you will notice it later when something happens that would have pulled you into a spiral before, and instead you respond with calm. Not because you are numb, but because you are trained. not because you have no emotions, but because you are leading them. As the steps compound, something important changes: your relationship with yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone at the mercy of circumstances. You begin to see yourself as someone who can handle what appears, not because you always know the answer, but because you trust your ability to find the next one. You trust your ability to think clearly enough to take the next step, and the next step is what creates the next answer. That trust is the foundation of calm. Calm is not the absence of difficulty. It is the absence of internal resistance. Difficulty can exist without chaos. Pressure can exist without panic. Problems can exist without collapse. The difference is not the event. The difference is what happens inside you when the event appears. When you stop fighting reality emotionally, energy becomes available. When energy becomes available, clarity returns. When clarity returns, action becomes simpler, not easier. Simpler. Simple means you can see the next move. Simple means you are not carrying the entire future in your mind at once. Simple means you can do one thing instead of trying to do everything. As you move forward, you will still encounter uncertainty. You will still feel doubt. You will still have moments where your mind wants to spiral back into old habits. That is normal. That is not proof that the work failed. That is proof that the work is needed. The goal is not to never struggle. The goal is to recover faster and to return to clarity with less drama. The difference now is awareness. You will notice when attention drifts toward rumination. You will notice when emotion begins to lead. You will notice when identity starts to shrink. You will catch yourself sooner. You will interrupt sooner. You will return sooner. In that noticing, choice reappears. You do not need to change everything at once. You do not need to apply every concept perfectly. You do not need to become a different person overnight. You only need to return to one principle when you feel yourself slipping. A focus on what you can do next. That focus keeps you grounded. It keeps you engaged. It keeps you moving. It prevents the mind from turning a moment into a lifetime. It prevents you from treating temporary difficulty as permanent failure. Life does not become clearer because problems disappear. It becomes clearer because your mind learns how to relate to problems differently. That skill is always available to you. It does not depend on mood. It does not depend on inspiration. It depends on practice. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, return to the basics. Separate facts from stories, lower emotional intensity, ask better questions, take a small step. Give your mind something real to do instead of something endless to think about. Clarity is built this way, quietly, consistently, without drama. This session does not end your challenges. It changes how you meet them. From this point on, problems are no longer something to fear. They are something to work with. They are signals that guide you back to your process. Create your iron mind by practicing this return again and again, until calm becomes your default and forward motion becomes your habit. You are no longer someone waiting for life to be easier. You are someone capable of thinking clearly even when it is not.
Want the written version? Grab the PDF for half a cup of coffee, $2. Link is in the description and the comments.